Hello everyone, and we are back for another brand new episode of How's the Shared Living podcast. This is episode 6 in season 6, and we're back again for another week to bring you the latest news, views and insights from the rented shared living sectors. So if you work in and around the PBSA, BTR, co-living, university accommodation, HMO and rented later living sectors, you are absolutely in the right place. So welcome. I'm Dee Neely from the Property Marketing Strategists.
I'm Dan Smith from Verberflow AI and Resi Consultancy.
And I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And first, let's hear from our headline sponsor.
Housed is sponsored by Spotlight Boost on mystudenthalls.com. Use Spotlight Boost to stand out in search results and drive more leads to your properties.
We are delighted that Dan and the team from My Student Halls have decided to be our headline sponsors once again. They are such a key part of the student accommodation marketing cycle and a great partner to us at Housed, so a big thank you. And a huge thank you to Wash Station, Utopia and Howden, and we will hear more from them later. Before we get on with the show, I just wanted to give you a quick update on our Housed Shared Living Summit coming to Leeds in May, which hopefully you've heard about. And if you haven't, please do come and speak to one of us about it. But before we talk about that, I just wanted to let you all know that we have a brand new Housed website. So what started as a loose idea to have a weekly chat and catch up on all shared living news and maybe record that into a podcast has turned into a very regular podcast. And now we have a brand new website. So please do go and check that out at housedpodcast.com. We'll also be updating you on the summit on this new website and introducing our summit partners, Collegiate UK, Abode Student Living, Utopia, The E-Word, TLJ, Housing Hand, Alasco, Verberflow, Scape, Miru and Loft. If you didn't hear your name in that list and you would like to join them, then we still have a few packages available. So please do get in touch if you'd like to know more. We're all very excited about that and we've got a great agenda building up. So yeah, please do reach out for us if you want to be involved. Now on with the show. Dan, you weren't in the UK last week. You were in Dubai at PropTech Connect. What did you learn, see, do? How was it?
Where do I start with this? So obviously I was out there on behalf of Verberflow and we were sort of hawking our AI communications platform to anyone who would listen out there. But we didn't have a booth or anything like that. We weren't quite big on PropTech Connect London. And I just wanted to suss it out this year and see if Dubai and the Middle East is potentially an opportunity for Verberflow in particular. It was a really good event for investors. I think there were a lot of startup investors out there, but less so in terms of operators and I suppose operators in the typical guise that we're used to in the UK or Europe from a rental perspective. They just don't have BTR or co-living or anything like that in Dubai because they're building these whacking great luxury apartments and trying to sell them off plan primarily. That is the focus of pretty much everyone. So it was good in terms of some introductions. We did pretty well in terms of investment while we were out there, but from an operations perspective, slightly less so from the traditional viewpoint that I was going there with. It also, I think for me, it just reinforced, even though it was quite a difficult January in terms of filling in my my tax returns, etc., that I'm not going to be moving to Dubai anytime soon to become a tax exile. Although this was the first year where I was like, oh gosh, this is quite painful. But yeah, it's just a very interesting place. I'm going to choose my words very carefully there, because I've got a lot of friends that live there, and no judgment against anyone that does want to go and become a tax exile there or just sees a better quality of life. Totally get that you may think that. It's just not for me, I don't think. Yeah, and then had a bit of a shocker with the flights on the way back. I don't think I did this, but my flight out was on the was on the 2nd. My flight back, 2nd of February, should I say? My flight back was on the 6th of March, and but I was the 11th person, and someone else at PropTech Connect as well had exactly the same problem where it had switched it, I think. So I have had a message from Emirates on my LinkedIn post, which is annoyingly one of the most LinkedIn posts with the most impressions over the last few months. But yeah, I have had a message from Emirates, hopefully sorting that out, because I had to pay another 400 quid. It was an interesting event. I would definitely recommend at least going to all of these prop tech events, because you will pick up some new things. But for me, I think it was just a different focus because it was primarily on, residential real estate from a transaction point of view rather than a rental perspective. So yeah, I will definitely be doing the London one again. That was really good. But Dubai, we'll see next year.
So there wasn't new tech that you didn't see in the UK in Dubai.
No, we are the new tech, to be honest with you. That was the great thing about it. We definitely felt like we were pioneering the sector, and that BTR and co-living, etc., student housing, definitely coming to Dubai, and so all of the usual suspects from a prop tech perspective will end up being there. It did give me a good chance to catch up with some industry friends, people that had just gone out there specifically for the event or that were just there coincidentally. But I didn't learn anything drastically new. Although the one thing that I think was actually quite interesting was how they're selling their rooms and their apartments, and the focus is very much on that, the 3D visuals and making sure that you can bring a property to life. I think that is going to come to student housing in quite a big way. I know it has already. I know Greystar have already done a few bits here and there with, and some others have too, with really showcasing the drone footage or a 3D VR mock-up of what a room looks like, the view from that room, etc. But because it's so high end in Dubai, they are at the forefront of how you sell a property. So it's just quite costly at the moment. But Mike from Property Sense was there, and I think that they do quite a good job of showcasing what that looks like. So I do think more is coming to the way that we visually showcase each of our rooms and properties. So that was probably my key highlight. But other than that, it was still very much, it made me feel like we were very much pioneering the sector.
I did see your post on that, Dan, and I don't know where I saw it, but I did see it. And I guess yes, it's great to have all that kind of 3D and the ability to kind of see a room in reality of what it is. But I guess my fear is that when you're in a world where we're trying to get affordability, it's almost giving the wrong impression that actually I've got all this money to use all this whizzy technology, and therefore am I really making the room as affordable as I can? And I kind of feel there has to be a balance there. And that's why I kind of feel that should we be seeing it in student accommodation in that sense? Like if it's at the right price and you can do it within your budget, then great. But I think, I've done over the years, done many focus groups with students around kind of what they're seeing on websites, what they're marketing. And if it's too whizzy and too snazzy, it kind of doesn't sit right with them. They're kind of like, actually, this isn't the reality. This is still, not just student accommodation, but it's just needs to be a warm, comfortable space for people to live. And if you go too far the other end with the marketing, are you giving that impression?
I know what you mean, whizzy and snazzy being the technical terms, but I think that because of how mature the Dubai real estate sector is, I do think they are ahead of where we are, even in student housing and PBSA. Yes, it's very different. Yes, it will add to the cost, and that's probably why it hasn't permeated student housing quite as well as it has done in other locations, because the US use this all the time. Like if you go to a US conference, they are all showcasing, they've got the VR headsets everywhere and they're showcasing the drone footage that they've taken, and then that you can see every single view from every single room, so you know exactly what that view is going to look like. Then you can see where the sun is every day on your apartment or whatever it might be. Honestly, it is really impressive, but it does add to the cost. So in a more mature market, I think, where it's getting tougher to fill beds, it is going to be about the USPs of selling and how you're actually doing that. Now, I think, yes, everyone wants a quick user journey and a quick booking journey, but I think this is also a measure of where things are headed with regards to AI, because I think a website will go further down the sales funnel. And I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this, because fairly soon it will be your own personal AI agent. You'll be typing into ChatGPT, find me the best student accommodation in Bournemouth, and ChatGPT will then go out and search the various sources. Typically, we know Student Crowd and some marketplaces, and then the universities will come first. And it will back and forth and compare all of the information that it needed and then give you that recommendation based on what it knows about you. Then it's on you as a person, a real human person, to then go and have a look at the websites of that specific property, for example. That will then be much more about social proof and much more from a sort of visual perspective, personalized a bit more to the room in particular. That may be where we have to start focusing on this on a global level, but from the UK in particular, because of the fact that our occupancy in student housing, PBSA in particular, has dropped by sort of 6% year on year, we are going to have to get a bit more focused on what is a USP when it comes to selling a room. Is it we don't do any visuals or any of the sexy stuff? We just tell people, inquire, and then come and do an actual viewing? Or are we just going to have to get a lot better at showcasing what a property really looks like, consistently, whether that's through development, not that anyone's really developing PBSA or even, BTR at the moment, but I think that's where we just need to probably get a bit smarter about what we're doing. Now that the internet speeds globally are improving drastically, you don't really have to worry too much about the fact that there's going to be a lag, or that you're not going to be able to use a system like that properly, where you've got the fly-throughs and the VR and whatever else.
Yeah, I've been listening to what both of you are saying, and I've got a few thoughts. I think the technology moving on and the internet speed, I hope that therefore we will see an end to the kind of awful fly-throughs that are laggy, that you have to click to move every step of the way. I hate them. I don't think they add any value whatsoever, and we never advise clients to do it. We think there's far better ways of showcasing a building than that. So I think it's really positive if it's moving on. I think my takeaway, I guess, is probably more aligned with what kind of Deanie was saying, really. And a real life example of that is this weekend, Bethany, my stepdaughter, is home for the weekend. We've been looking at accommodation for her second year of university. And I recommended to her a private halls building in the city she's studying, where it's non-ensuite, it's city centre, and the rooms are from £95 per week. She's quite happy not to have an ensuite because she's not got an ensuite now in university accommodation. So why would she suddenly miraculously need an ensuite in her second year? She wants to be in the city centre. Laundry is included for this £95 a week as well, which is how this conversation started, because we were talking about laundry. And there's communal facilities as well. So for her, it ticks all of the boxes. I don't think it would sit well with this brand if they went, to coin Deanie's phrase, whizzy and snazzy, with their fly-throughs and their drone footage and their AI. It wouldn't sit right on their website. It wouldn't sit right with their brand. And it would completely seem at odds with a price of £95 per week. But just because it's at the more affordable end doesn't mean that people should overlook it, because it might not, look as polished or professional as other ones. But people don't really, they would probably have to put the price up of their rooms if they were to invest in technology like that. So therefore, it would be completely sort of counterproductive to do that. So I do think that there's a balance. And this is where marketing strategy comes in, which is exactly what me and Deanie do as part of our consultancy. You have to think, who is your target audience? Who are you trying to attract? And what are the best ways of communicating that product to those particular students? So that kind of technology I don't think should be for everybody, because it's just not appropriate.
I agree with that. I think we do a really good job of championing affordability on this podcast, but I do think that there are other operators out there that are going to be focused on, right, how do we make this look as good as it possibly can? And money is not necessarily no object, but there are the budgets for it. I'd say anyone in the mid-range needs to be looking at how they're selling their room. Affordable sector, non-ensuite rooms, etc., slightly less of a focus on that. The more you invest in that side of things, does that impact the overall rent cost? Potentially. So I think that we do need to be careful of that. But there are so many operators out there, and a lot that are now operating in the value gap that we talk about all the time. And we're constantly mentioning this in our reports. When we're speaking to operators that say, look, we're not sure what to do with this property, we aren't as occupied as we want to be, or we got to full occupancy too late, we left loads of revenue on the table, did we? Or, we're just having to work really hard to fill these beds. More often than not, they're falling into a value gap. And I think that's where you have to make sure that you are selling your rooms as accurately as possible. And maybe it is time to get a bit snazzy and whizzy, but not at the expense of affordability, because that will still be the number one factor in decision making. So, yeah, I totally agree, Sarah. We just need to be mindful of the fact that it's not going to be for everyone. how they sell those rooms, but that there's definitely an opportunity when you see that, Dubai in terms of the way they're selling their real estate, but also BTR is very forward thinking on some of those VR side of things as well. Student housing, less so. And I think we just need to be a bit mindful that there's different parts of the sectors.
And I'm glad I didn't use the word that my kids have made up, which is schnancy, instead of whizzy and fancy. So a mix of the two. So we will move on, but first let's hear a word from our sponsor. Utopia is the trusted partner for high-performance asset management, cutting energy costs, reducing risk, and delivering proven ESG results.
With billions of data points and 75,000 rooms monitored, Utopia turns real-time intelligence into measurable value, protecting investments and driving continuous improvement.
Choose intelligence that delivers. Choose Utopia.
Many thanks to Utopia for continuing to support the House podcast. You are great partners and we're really pleased to have you on board. Thank you. So our next topic that we wanted to discuss today was rent controls. We've talked about it various times amongst lots of different conversations, along with renters' rights, the changes in Ireland, but we've never really done a whole session on it or a whole discussion on it. So it feels about the right time to kind of delve a bit deeper into it. So really wanting to kind of look at what works, what doesn't work. What I wanted to look at was examples of kind of where it is deemed to be working. So I did a bit of research, and an example that is often cited as working is in Austria, in Vienna. And it's really held up as a success, but it's not just about rent controls alone. And I think what happens in Vienna is that there is a large investment in housing from the government. So it's not all private sector building. And it's that long-term thinking of housing being treated as infrastructure, not just an asset class. So in the UK, it feels like we are a long way from that. But that balance of large, older kind of building is regulated with the rent controls, but new builds, there is more flexibility within that. So it kind of feels that there's the ability to change that policy as development is made. But that is in a system that delivers a lot of homes, which we don't have that in the UK. So it's one of our biggest issues is that there is a relationship between the private sector and the public sector to build, and there's rules and regulations about that building that people are going into and knowing about. Thoughts, anyone, on rent controls, and can it work?
No, look, I think there's just got to be so many tailwinds in favor of why those rent controls can work. I mean, they have to be very light touch. They do have to allow for annual increases, but I just don't think that allowing, it's a 1 or 2% will be sufficient. You have to have ample supply, and I think that's where most locations just don't. They already don't have that supply. And then obviously everything new, if it's really going to work, everything new has to be exempt. I hate it. We've seen it across the board. So many different cities on a global level have tried this in its in various degrees, and I think that it worries me when I see Andy Burnham saying things like, oh yes, we think rent controls is a great idea, because he's jumping on it as a buzzword rather than, and this might stop him coming to UK Reef and talking at the House Shared Living Summit, but it's just a political football at the moment. And what are people interested in? Oh yeah, the fact that they're paying too much for their rent. Okay, great. So rent controls, that's what we'll do. Great idea. And we think that this is the next the next policy shift that we need to be pushing after the Renters' Rights Bill. And there's no concrete ideas behind it. He freely admits it. It's like, I don't know what it looks like, but yeah, we think rent controls are a good idea. That is catastrophic. That would completely screw up Manchester rental market. It would stop development completely in its tracks, as it has done in various other locations, Dublin being a prime example, Berlin as well. You've seen what's happened there. Like that's been a debacle, and it just pushes waiting lists up, because no one's then interested in building more supply realistically, or being a landlord. I don't know. I just think it's so short-sighted. Incentivize development in the right locations, and that will be half the battle to the problem. It's almost a band-aid. It's seen as a quick fix, but I am just not a fan, and we'll probably get a lot of emails and messages about this saying, oh no, I think we do need rent controls, but no, we need to build more, like build more of the right stock so that the prices drop. It's really that simple. Let's take a look at Nottingham and what's happened there in student housing. We've built a load of stock and the prices have dropped fairly significantly. Sheffield, Coventry, there's your prime examples of, what happens when the occupancy drops, the rents drop. And that's because literally the councils open the floodgates on the planning. So yeah, I just don't like it. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
We've discussed before and we've heard at conferences this concept of the missing middle. And I think that's where the problem is, because we have affordable accommodation with a capital A. We have social housing, not enough of it by any stretch of the imagination. But there are people and there are key workers and there are people who can live in affordable accommodation. There are other people that aren't eligible to live in affordable accommodation with a capital A, but they can't afford market rents. So these are the missing middle, that they're earning too much to be cast as kind of social housing tenants, but they probably don't earn enough to rent on the open market. So where does that leave people? I'm not saying the answer is rent controls, but it's not sustainable. And I was reading an article on the Big Issue website from somebody in Gen Z that was basically saying, how am I ever going to move out of home? And I think that is the knock-on effect. And, the three of us hosts, we've all got, children either in teenage years or will be soon moving towards university. The reality is, are we going to be living with our children forever? Because how are they going to even afford to rent? Never mind buy, which isn't something I'm massively worried about, but the rent is so high at the moment, and that's going to impact housing moving forward, because it means I'm going to be in my family home for a lot longer, probably because my family living at home is going to be bigger for longer. So I'm not going to be freeing up my family house. I'm not going to be downsizing anytime soon. So the fact that people can't afford to rent is going to have this massive knock-on effect in the future. And we're already seeing it in older people staying in their family homes because they haven't got anywhere to move to either. So, what that happens is that we're going to have this generation of people that are either staying with their families or they're having to rent very, very small units. They may not be able to expand their families. We already have a kind of low birth rate situation in the UK. And if people can't move into a bigger home, then they're not going to be able to grow their families, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is a significant knock-on effect with not being able to rent. I'll just give you an example. So my partner, Paul, when he first got divorced about 12 years ago, he rented a house down the road from where we live now. It was a 3-bedroom end of terrace house. He rented it for around £800 a month. It's up for rent again now. It's £1,500. So in 12 years, it's, gone up by almost 100% rent. Nothing has been done to that house. We looked at the pictures. It hasn't been improved. There's nothing different about it to there was 12 years ago. So that landlord has done incredibly well. So brilliant for that landlord. Incredibly happy for them. But have wages gone up by the same amount? Could a young family rent that 3-bedroom home for £1,500 a month now? Probably not. So something has to change. I'm not saying it's rent controls, but I'm saying it's not working.
Definitely, it is not working. But the entire housing sector is not working. And I think that rent controls, when the supply is already constrained, rent controls do not work. And investors will lose confidence. There's definitely not the answer. But is renting broken in the UK? Well, that's why we've had to put the Renters' Rights Bill in, primarily, to ensure that, the tenants are better cared for and better looked after from a legal standpoint. Now, does that bring the prices down? No. That is the key issue. We have no answers in sight to the affordability crisis in renting or the housing crisis as a whole. We're going to be well short. The government going to be about 50% short, depending on who you listen to, in terms of the 1.5 million homes target. Rental inflation is astronomical. We we just aren't doing enough about it. And for me, I just don't know where you go from here. I think I don't like an interventionist government. I don't really want them to have to control it, but they aren't doing enough on the other end to incentivize the building of rental properties, whether they be apartments in BTR or single family housing. And I think that's one of the key issues, because the Renters' Rights Bill, I was speaking to a landlord last week, student HMO landlord, about 600 properties, like a big shot landlord. And they were saying they are selling up in droves. The landlords in student HMO sector are selling up very, very quickly, and it's all being returned to the market. So it's going to have an impact on house prices, because it's not going back to typical rental. They're just selling up into the general sale market. We have Steve Reed, the Minister for Housing, has his work cut out. There is no current policy or direction of travel that is really going to solve the cost of living crisis when it comes to accommodation, whether that be rented or purchasing a house, and the supply crisis, whereby we just aren't building those houses that we're having to, that we need to bring down those prices. Like, this is just one of the key problems. I could talk about this at length. I think we probably should dedicate an episode to some of the solutions as to what this could look like, and we'll talk about that a lot more at UK Reef at the Shared Living Summit. But yeah, right now the government have gone missing in any kind of real world, practical and pragmatic policy that can improve the situation, in my opinion.
But it's been a policy for 10 plus years to build more, and it's not working. And I think that is, not that to say I'm a fan of rent controls, but that is why Andy Burnham and Zach Balansky, I guess, is trying to suggest another solution, which might not be the right solution. But there is a whole generation of people, as Sarah says, that can't rent, can't buy. So they're left with no options. I mean, I think it was last week that it was announced that the average house price is top £300,000 for the first time ever, which is a lot, as an average house price. Though one positive thing is wage growth had outstripped house inflation for the first time since 2022. But then, so people kind of have to rent because they can't buy, but then they can't rent because it's unaffordable. So we're stuck in this cycle, and we've had policy after policy about building houses, and it's not happening. It's not working. So it is a broken system. And I think, when you were talking about kind of Nottingham and how there's been lots of supply now, PBSA is, oversupplied in the sense that there's empty rooms there, comes down to my argument again and again, is that homes spaces for other people that other people could be living in if we weren't just building one housing for one type of customer.
I think, well, of course, planning has to be heavily involved, but they're already thinking in Nottingham, they're already thinking quite far ahead in terms of what happens when the number of 18-year-olds eligible to go to university from the UK drops from 2030 to 2040, drops by 20% there. So when you then see a drop off in student numbers going to university potentially, because that looks like the direction of travel here, newsflash, what can those PBSA properties, what can they be repurposed into? Well, if they're all studios, it's not that easy to repurpose them into BTR stock. But then if you're bringing in rent controls, you're already choking that supply of BTR anyway. It kills BTR investment. I've seen it across the board. And BTR is a fledgling sector that is in quite a sort of perilous state at the moment. No one seems to be ploughing in there. Everyone's going into single family rentals and single family housing, but not necessarily into BTR, primarily because of worry about rent caps, also the building safety regulator and the gateways and all of that good stuff. But we just don't have the environment right now where we are incentivizing anyone to build anything. Like, there's a lot of moving of chairs, but there's no one really with spades in the ground. And the government really needs to take a look at why. And if Zach Polanski and anyone else wants to start bringing in rent controls, that is because you're just not incentivizing building the right stock in the right places. And so I think we need some more joined up thinking. Everybody in government right now, from what we can see, or what I can see in particular, seems to be operating in a silo that is just focused on one specific thing. The rental sector also seems to have been forgotten about in terms of the house building numbers and what we should be looking at. And how we can incentivize delivery of these rooms, beds, and houses. And I think that's where, we aren't seeing enough traction with lobbying. We aren't seeing enough movement from government or policy, etc. And so it seems pretty easy. Let's just lean back on rent controls because that will make everyone vote for us because it will make their rents cheaper. No, not in the long term. It's going to completely screw up the entire market. You'll end up with 10 to 20 year waiting lists for an apartment or a house or whatever it might be. And there are so many examples where it just hasn't worked. It pushes landlords out, it reduces the quality, and it will completely screw up the the rental market.
And I think maybe your idea is good. Maybe we should do an episode and think about solutions. So I think if anyone's got any kind of ideas or thoughts on that, please get in touch with us, because something needs to change, and it's not happening at the moment. Before we go on to our next topic, we'll just hear from our sponsor.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
Wash Station is a leader in managed laundry services. They use smart technology to deliver reliable, efficient laundry solutions that put customers first. Thank you so much to Wash Station for sponsoring the podcast. So this week there was news from students around kind of the impact of student loans, how much they were paying impact of student loans. I think there was an interview with a medical student who I think they'd borrowed 35,000, they had to pay back 70,000. And I guess really what I wanted to discuss is, are we talking enough about the impact and reputation of the cost of a degree and a student loan? And should the private PBSA sector be doing more to change that conversation? And how damaging is it actually to student numbers?
I went for a run this morning and I was digesting this because I was listening to the News Agents episode about this. What I think needs to be clear is there's a lot of clickbait headlines. There's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon of this. And it is not about the current students who are going to university now. This is about the students. The last cohort were 2022. So this isn't impacting the student. If you work in the PBSA sector, this isn't impacting the students you're targeting now. The students that have been impacted by this, in inverted commas, scandal have already left university or will be very soon. So there's nothing that the sector can do to influence the terms and conditions of those students' loan repayments. And that is being investigated. So I was thinking, why are we talking about it on House? I don't really understand how it's relevant. I do think there's a few reasons why it's relevant to talk about it on a podcast about shared living, is potentially BTR. Because a lot of these students are paying a lot of money and it's predominantly interest that they're paying. So they are going to have less income to spend on other things should they meet the earnings threshold. So it might be, to our previous segment, that they are going to have less money to spend on rent. So actually, I think this is more relevant for probably people that are trying to target 21 to 20 to 30-year-olds who were on this type of loan repayment, because they will have less money. The other thought process that my brain went to is actually the politicians don't seem to understand this. The press don't seem to understand it. Parents don't understand it. Students don't understand it. So surely this is a wake-up call to the sector to try and understand the pressures that students and parents are under. Whatever student loan repayment or maintenance loan repayment deal you're under, it's just clarifying the thought process that students and young people are going through at the moment. And I think that it will be damaging to the future of students going to university, because they're not reading the detail. All they will see is, oh my God, student loans are awful. The government are loan sharks. They're basically stealing from us. And there's no way I can go to university now because it's made it unaffordable. That's not the case. There are still professions that you will need to go to university for, regardless of the cost of it. There are other courses that students will probably think, I'm not going to get into a student loan to do that particular course. So I think it will impact numbers in the future, but I don't think it's anything that the PBSA sector need to get involved in, apart from understanding that what is going on with their target audience, really.
I think this is potentially a briefing campaign from the government. I think that they are aware that supporting students and supporting universities is not a popular vote winner for them, but that something needs to happen to get those young voters and those students who are traditionally Labour voters on board, because there are some, there's some worrying signs in terms of the polling and how Labour are getting on currently, and they are going to need to mobilise the young vote. So if they can put some, briefings out into the media to say, hey, look at these students on Plan 2 in particular, who have been totally shafted by the student loan system. And there are 5 different plans. Just to give a quick summary, there are 5 different plans. Plan 2 is the one that everybody has a problem with, like Sarah says. So that's English students 2012 to 2023. They repay 9% over £27,000. They have an interest rate which is RPI plus up to 3%. And obviously, you think about the rate of inflation over the last few years, it absolutely shot up. Anytime there's double digits in terms of inflation, they are going to be paying an absolute fortune plus 3%. You can write it off after 30 years, but most people will end up with huge balances and never repay it at all. It's an anchor. It's a drag. It is a graduate tax. And that is what everybody is in uproar about. At the moment, Plan 5, which is anyone from 2023 onwards, repay 9% over £25,000. It's inflation only. It's only linked to inflation, which obviously, when inflation's high, that's still going to be quite a struggle, but it doesn't have the extra 3% on top. And you write it off after 40 years. So you pay less interest overall, but you pay it for much longer. So it is more of a lifelong sort of tax. So people have a problem with the Plan 2 in particular, and that is where the uproar is focused on. I do think it's potentially a briefing campaign. I love the fact that it's coming to the fore because it is woefully unfair. It does need a solution. The government know that, even though Rachel Reeves was being the classic politician talking about it the other day. I was horrible hearing her and Keir Starmer talk in, word soup about things without committing to anything or saying, yeah, do you know what? This is really unfair. We'll have a look at it, but we're not sure what we can do. Like, it's just, you cannot say in any way, shape or form that some of those plans are fair. And so the fact that that's being called out by various different media entities as well. It's not just The Guardian calling this out. It's been in every single paper how unfair these student loans are and how this is a graduate tax rather than a loan. I think it's great. And I think long may it continue, because it is definitely affecting the number of commuter students that we have. It will affect the number of students that leave and then, as you say, Sarah, go into BTR once they've graduated from university. It will affect the number of people that can actually graduate because they start thinking, hang on a minute, this just isn't worth it. Like, I am going to be leaving university as if I went to college in the US with £100,000 of debt. That is an anchor and will be an anchor to me for 40 years. And it will penalise the high earners as well, because they'll actually pay it back, and they'll have to pay back 100 grand or whatever it might be. The system is wrong. It needs sorting out. I'd like to think that this is a briefing campaign from Labour to the media to get these people in front of the cameras and get the interviews with the medical student that's going to pay back double what they thought they'd have to. I mean, maybe there is strategy around it, but maybe it's just that the system is woefully unfair. We're only just waking up to it, and something needs to be done. So, yeah, I'd be really interested to see if there's any movement off the back of it, and if this is actually a strategy from the government to brief it in to then change the student loans, and by proxy, kind of that will help to prop up some universities, because maybe we won't just see the attrition from universities that we're expecting at the moment, where people are like, no, I can't afford to go to university. I'm not seeing the value or the graduate outcome that I would want. So why would I saddle myself with 40 years worth of debt? Like, it is making me question, and it's even making me think about what, Wilbur, Ralph and Bodie are going to end up doing. Like, are they going to go to university? I'm not sure. I'd be surprised if they all did. And will university exist in the same guise? No, don't think so. But yeah, sorry, Dean.
That's the issue, isn't it? I think it's, as Sarah said, it's people need to educate themselves on what this is, what it means for yourself as a student or your children as students, and and plan for it and understand it. But it comes down to there is a marketing and communication issue here, because it is damaging to people who want to go to university. And I like your thought, Dan, that the Labour government are using a strategy to do this to make change for the better. But I still worry that actually their strategy is actually to probably focus more on apprenticeships and vocational and not the university route traditionally, and reduce that down the number of people that do go off to university. And that's where I think a real strategy there is actually making apprenticeships on parity with a degree, and it's just a different way of studying. So you still can be partnered with the university, and you still can go away and study, but you do that while you're working, and you end up at the same place at the end of it.
I absolutely agree with you there. So I agree with you that should be the case, that we should have degree apprenticeships on a level with a university undergraduate degree. But there is just something about the noise that this has created. Maybe it's just purely the unfairness of it all, but normally the media don't really get the tiny violins out for students, to be honest, because it's seen as like, well, you made this choice. You were, when you were 16, 17, you will have known how loans work and what you'd have to pay back and what this would look like. And, in a few groups that we're in, I know that was called out like, well, students should just know this. I don't know. I didn't. I wouldn't have thought about the consequences of my actions of going to university and what that would do to me, because I was very lucky. I left university in 2004, so I didn't have to worry about all of that. I didn't have to worry about £9,000 tuition fees. Mine were 3, and yes, it took me a while to pay back my student loan, but that was partly because I'd set up my own business, so there were ways for me to just push that back a bit further. But I think this is potentially a briefing campaign, and but I think what we're hearing from Keir Starmer and the various others is about the apprenticeships. So it's a bit of a dual-pronged approach, this, but it might be accidental, where the government are saying we need more apprentices, we need more apprenticeship degrees, we need more partnerships with industry, we need universities to be more commercial about how they think about that. You can't just get students onto a conveyor belt anymore and churn them out, because those jobs at the end of it just won't exist in the same way that they previously have, partly because of AI, partly just because of the way certain industries are faring at the moment. And I think that it's just a bit of food for thought as to what may be happening here. The government may then end up, realizing that, yeah, they have to. And you know what? I quite often on the way back from places, I have a chat with ChatGPT or any of the other models. Other models are available, and so I was just saying, like, what are the options for funding universities better and for funding more apprenticeships? And firstly, you need the space for the apprenticeships as well, so you need companies to be on board. But there's already an apprenticeship levy, which is any company over £3 million has to put, I think it's 0.5% of their wage bill into the apprenticeship levy. So in my head, thinking very simply about this, why do we not make sure that those larger companies can? Firstly, I think that needs to be increased. I just think there's no way around doing that. So whatever your wage bill is, 1%, whatever that might look like. But I think there needs to be some kind of university levy in that way, shape or form as well, whereby industry then gets to partner with these universities, not just to do apprenticeship degrees, but to then invest in the future of their industry with the research, with creating those pathways into graduate recruitment. I think that's where the government are probably headed with some of this, to build up, because again, you're not going to get your tiny violins out for any company that is spending £3 million on a wage bill. I think that company should hopefully be in a good enough shape that they could afford another 0.5% of that. So I think that this is probably the direction of travel, that there will be more support from industry for universities, or maybe that's students in some way, shape or form, and an increase in the apprenticeship levy.
No, that's where my thoughts have been going, is that actually businesses, everyone benefits from education, right? we're in a productivity issue in the UK, and the only way out of that is to educate and build productivity and build our businesses, and we all benefit from education. So I think there has to be more input from corporations that benefit from skilled people coming in, but you don't want to make it unaffordable to employ graduates. So, you need to work that out. I don't know all the answers, but I agree. I think there has to be some way that as a society we recognise the investment in education is an investment in our society and productivity, and it's better for everyone, not just the individual that's educated.
I think just to sum it up and kind of bring it back to real estate, I think everything that you said, Dan, and all of the negative PR around student loans, if I was a PBSA investor or developer, I think I would be looking very hard at how this is impacting the 15, 16, 17-year-olds and their parents, because they're the ones who are being built for now. And I just think the numbers are going to keep reducing and reducing. It looks like the numbers of 18-year-olds going to university are increasing, but it's not increasing in proportion with the number of 18-year-olds. So actually, over the years, I think the numbers going to university and certainly living away from university, going back to my point about the maintenance loan, is going to reduce. So, and this probably links back to the other two topics that we were talking about in today's podcast, and Deanie's favourite subject, which is if you want to invest in real estate, then don't think so narrow as to different asset classes within that, because actually, if you want to invest in real estate, just build homes that people can live with. They may be students, they may not be students, but at least you're not going to have stranded assets in 4 years' time when the impact of all of this comes to fruition and actually there's just less people going to university.
Totally agree with that, and there are a lot of investors out there at the moment, and we're working with some of them who are looking at converting their PBSA, because they're not making as much money as they used to, or they thought they would. The occupancy is not where they thought it would be, and that the direction of travel doesn't look great. So I am seeing a lot starting to think, well, I could just be a co-living or property effectively and be PBSA through the back door, and then I can still house students, but I can also house young professionals, etc. We are going to be seeing more and more of that. It's a case of how you do that. Obviously, there's things about, from a compliance perspective, what that looks like. Then you can throw in ANUC as well, and how that looks with accrediting. You can't accredit a floor; it's accrediting buildings rather than parts of buildings. And every PBSA is going to want to be ANUC accredited. So it's that is a real challenge. But I am seeing more investors say, in specific locations, and some locations that are quite surprising. It's not just the guys in Sheffield and Coventry and Leeds that are looking at that. It's across the board. Most cities are starting to think about 2030 and beyond, what that looks like from a student numbers perspective, and how you can knit together those really sticky cities that keep their graduates in those cities because it's such a desirable place to live, and make sure that you have student housing, co-living, running kind of in parallel alongside each other, really.
Hallelujah. Hopefully people do start just building homes for people without streamlining them into one sub-sector. That's a great discussion. I'm sure we could have carried on, but we do need to move on. But first, a word from our newest sponsor, Howden.
Howden is the 5th largest employee-owned business in the UK and one of the largest insurance groups globally. With over 60 years' experience, Howden's specialist education division delivers tailored insurance, risk management and wellbeing solutions for the education sector.
They're the trusted partner of nearly 1,000 schools, colleges, universities and student accommodation providers across the UK.
Howden helps owners and operators protect what matters most, and so they are the perfect sponsors for Housed. Thank you for coming on board for Season 6.
And a big thank you once again to Howden for joining us for this season. Before we finish today, there's just a quick reminder that nominations are still currently open for the Top Voices of Property Marketing 2026, the eWords annual initiative celebrating individuals influencing how property marketing is evolving. Top Voices recognises those whose ideas, insight and output are shaping strategy, creativity, data and communication across the sector. There is only 1 week left to nominate, so if there's someone whose work consistently stands out, whether through innovative content, expert commentary or future-focused thinking, nominations are open across PBSA, Build to Rent, Later Living and beyond. Nominations do close at 12 p.m. on Friday the 20th of February, and you can submit nominations at theeword.co.uk. Winners will be announced in March, and I'm sure we've all got our nominations in on the podcast. I've got some nods from Dan and Sarah, so that's good. So a big thank you to My Student Halls for being our headline sponsor for the season once again. Your support is always hugely appreciated. And of course, thank you to Utopia and Wash Station for coming on board again for season 6. We are grateful for your support. And finally, our new sponsor, Howden. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you so much for listening. We won't be next week for more news, views and insights because it is half term. So we are going to take a break so that we can not juggle the kids and podcasts and work and everything else. So there's over 90 other episodes in our back catalogue, so you can catch up on any you may have missed. And they can all be found on Spotify, Amazon, Apple and all your favourite podcast channels. We will see you in a couple of weeks.